Starting off at number 10, Rumpelstiltskin. So you probably heard this one growing up, or at least the name tossed around. Basically, a king finds out a girl can spin straw into gold, even though she can't, locks her up into a room and says, do it, spin some straw into gold for me or you die. And so a creature decides to help her in return for gifts, and she eventually promises this creature man her firstborn kid. And so the king marries her, being like, you can spin straw into gold, wild. Then they have a baby, and the creature man thing says, you can keep your baby if you can guess my name in 3 days. This creature of course is Rumpelstiltskin, which is a lovely name, but the now queen now overhears him saying his name, so she guesses right, and he is so mad he tears himself in half. Specifically, he plunged his right foot so deep into earth that his whole leg went in, and then in rage he pulled at his leg so hard with both hands that he tore himself in two. Yeah, so fairy tales, woo! Ripped in half. On to number 9, Rapunzel. In this tale of Rapunzel and the Brothers Grimm version, Rapunzel is not the princess. She's actually the firstborn of a woman that had a craving for the lettuce type that is called Rapunzel. And this woman told her husband that if she didn't eat some of this, she would die, which is relatable. So her husband stole that lettuce called Rapunzel enough time that the enchantress that grew the lettuce said, oh boy, you shouldn't do that or I'll take your firstborn child. So he looked at the lettuce, looked at the enchantress and said, deal, and the couple gave the baby to the enchantress later on, because we just want some lettuce obviously. Anyways, fast forward through Rapunzel up in the tower, letting her hair down for Gothel, all that. One day a prince comes along and hears Rapunzel singing, and he calls up to her to let her hair down, and they start hanging out. Tinder could never. So even with all that, Gothel does find out, cuts off Rapunzel's hair, and then leaves her in the desert. Then she waits in the tower for the prince and says, boy, Rapunzel's gone, you'll never see her again. And then the prince is so beside himself in agony that he throws himself out the tower. He survived the 20-story fall, but he landed in bushes where thorns pierced into his eyes and he was blinded. He roamed around blind for years to come until he stumbled upon the familiar voice of Rapunzel. Her tears healed his eyes, and they went back to his kingdom with their twins, and they lived happily ever after. So in 3 words, this story is kidnapping, blindness, and lettuce. On to number 8, Thumbling. So this is Thumbling, not Thumbelina. In this one, a couple has a child that is so tiny and it never grows bigger, but they love their son Thumbling anyways. Wholesome beginnings, I love it. But then some people find out and they say they will buy Thumbling since they think they will make a load of money parading him around. So the dad is like, no, I don't want this, I love my son, but Thumbling is a bit of a trickster and says, take the money, dad, I'll find my way back. Thumbling does find his way back, but only after running away from the people who bought him, being eaten by a cow, cut out of the cow then eaten by a wolf, and then tricking the wolf to eat at his parents' house, and then his parents kill the wolf and cut him out of the wolf. And then he's like, I made it back. What an entrance. It is a happily ever after, but gruesome. I feel like they cut into so many animals in these. You'll see, there's more. Bringing us next to number 7, Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel, if you will. German names, you can tell. Origins, the Grimm brothers, Brothers Grimm. So this one starts right into it. The family is so poor they don't have enough to eat, so the stepmother in the family turns to the father and says, let's lead them out into the forest, give them each a piece of bread, and leave them. And she keeps bugging him until he relents and says, I'll do it, but I won't be happy about it. So they do their plan, but Hansel left a trail of light rocks so they could find their way back to the house. So then the parents go through the same argument and do the same plan later, but this time Hansel didn't have time to gather rocks, so he left little trails of bread instead. But bread didn't really stay put, pigeons and other birds kind of took it and were like, lunch. So they didn't have their way back. So then Hansel and Gretel are 2 or 3 days wandering in the forest and come upon, boom, the witch in the beautiful house made of candy and goodies. And I feel like we all know this part. The witch starts out nice, uses Gretel to help her cook the meals, and then trying to fatten Hansel up to eat him. But then she gets impatient, lights an oven, is like, Gretel, you should crawl in and see if it's, warm yet. And Gretel's like, I know what you're trying to do. I don't know how to get into the oven. So then the witch peeks their head in, Gretel shoves them in the oven, boom, locks it up, burns the witch alive. Because this is how fairy tales go, apparently. And yet they listen to the witch scream until their screams ring out and the witch is dead. They take the riches from the witch's house, go home, and their dad is just there and the stepmother's dead with no explanation. In 3 words, this one is deceit, de witch, and de death. Let's move on to number 6, Cinderella. This Cinderella is pretty similar in both versions, but it's just a bit more grim in the Grimm version, First of all, the stepsisters in the Grimm version are not outwardly ugly in this one. They're beautiful, just horrible people. The stepmother and stepsisters make Cinderella's life miserable until her fairy godmother steps in. And in this version, her fairy godmother is a magical tree with little birds. Then much the same happens with Cinderella going to the ball, making the prince swoon, and leaving a shoe that is so small because she has such tiny little feet. Then, because the stepsisters wanted to marry into royalty so bad, they did what they could to get into the shoe. One cut off a toe and one cut off a heel. Just like, oh, I really want this, I'm just gonna cut cut parts of my feet off? I don't know. The prince notices when blood is rushing out of the shoe and is like, I don't think you're the person. I don't recognize your face or your feet. One apparently is more important than the other. Oh, and also at the very end of the story, the stepsisters try to weasel their way back into Cinderella's good graces and get their eyes pecked out by pigeons. So this one in 3 words: labor, feet, and karma. Moving on to number 5, Frog Prince, which you may think about Princess and the Frog similar. So in modern versions of this tale, the spell on the Frog Prince is broken by a kiss from the princess, or even by spending 3 days on the princess's pillow. But did you know the real origins? In the original, the princess becomes so frustrated and disgusted that she throws the frog against a wall, and then he's revealed to be a prince. So first just like brutally throwing this frog, and then a prince. This is supposed to be a fairy tale? Great metaphor, obviously. You don't yeet a frog and then get a prince. That doesn't make sense. On to number 4, Little Snow White, aka Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. So a queen had Snow White and died while she was born. Then the king took another wife who was really vain, and that queen spoke into a mirror that told her that she was the fairest of them all. And so this happened until Snow White grew up and the mirror said Snow White was more beautiful, so then the new queen hated her. And this is supposed to be her stepmom. Grimm Brothers got a thing against stepmoms, I feel. So anyways, this queen told the huntsman to take Snow White into the forest and cut out her heart and bring it back. So he was going to, and then he was like, ugh, I can't, cut out the heart of a wild boar instead and brought that to the queen. The queen, thinking it was Snow White's heart, got the cook to cook it for her and then ate it. Just like, yeah, what? No. Anyways, Snow White meets up with the dwarves, yada yada yada, becomes their housemaid for safety, food, and a place to stay. But then, Queen finds out, dresses up as a witch, tries to kill Snow White 3 times, one with a really tight corset, one with a poisoned comb, and then finally, poisoned apple. So yes, Snow White was as good as dead. The dwarves put her in a glass coffin and then on a mountain with at least one dwarf watching out for her. Just kinda unique, but I'll go with it. But then a king's son found her and asked if he could buy her in the coffin from the dwarves. Just buying a dead body, not suspicious at all. They said no. But then the prince asked if he could have her as a gift, just like he would treasure her, and they said yes. So not for the money, but for just the niceness. Anyways, while carrying the glass coffin, some of his guards I assume, the poison apple dislodged from her throat when the coffin fell, and then she was back to life, and then her and the prince wed. Romance at its finest, I know. At the wedding, the evil queen had to dance in iron shoes that were molten hot until she dropped dead. On to number 3, the donkey. So you've heard of Donkey from Shrek, but have you heard of the donkey? This one's a roller coaster, so strap in, I will stick to the main points. A king and queen had a kid, but it came out as a donkey. The queen was not having it, but the king decided they should raise this donkey as they would a child. So this noble donkey grows up well-mannered and even mastered the lute. It's kinda wild, but I like it, and it gets wilder. So the donkey travels to another kingdom, befriends the king, marries the princess, and is found out by the servant that is spying on the donkey on behalf of the king that the entire time it's been a man in a donkey suit. Yep, entire time a man dressing up as a donkey. That means since birth, this man has been dressing up as a donkey, taking all the ridicule that comes with it, and making an ass out of himself. Literally. The king burns the donkey skin suit and says, live your truth, man. So in the end, Donkey Man gets his wife's kingdom when her father dies, his own kingdom, and just has everything he wants, and he's no longer in a donkey skin suit. Please tell me what you think the moral of this story is down below. Number 2, the mouse, the bird, and the sausage. So a mouse, a bird, and a sausage are all living together as a cohesive household unit. Bird gets the wood for the fire, mouse gets the water, lights the fire, and sets the table, and then the sausage cooks for them to all eat well. When the sausage cooks, they even dip themselves into the pot to add a little bit of seasoning. Then one day they try to switch it up, but the sausage gets eaten by a dog while it tries to get the wood for the fire. The mouse goes into the pot to try to season it, just like sausage, but it dies, and then the bird falls into the well while trying to get water. I think this story is trying to say stick to what you're good at, but that doesn't seem like the best moral of a story. Leave that one to you again. Lastly, let's move on to number 1, Little Red Cap, which is a variation of Little Red Riding Hood, possibly. There is another variation by Perrault called Le Petit Chaperon Rouge, which is a different tale, but today we are talking about the Grimm stories, so let's go into this one anyways. In this one, it is not a Red Riding Hood, but it is a velvet red cap, which I say, all the more fashion. So Little Red runs into the wolf while on her way to give her ill grandmother cake and wine. That's what heals me as well. The wolf gets directions to her grandmother's house from Little Red and then points out some flowers to distract her. As she's distracted, he runs over to grandma's, eats her, and then Red comes and he is in full granny costume until she comes close and then he eats her as well. After that, he's so full that he falls asleep and snores just really loud. I would too. Anyways, he snores so loud that a huntsman hears him and, get this, the huntsman realizes the wolf probably ate grandmother, so he cuts open his stomach with scissors until both Little Red Riding Hood and the grandmother come out. They now fill his open stomach with stones, and at this point he is still somehow sleeping. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper too, so I kinda get it. Anyways, he tried to get up but was so heavy he fell dead. So then the huntsman skinned the wolf for the fur, the grandma ate cake and drank wine and felt better, and everyone just kind of happily ever after and learnt their lesson to not stray from the main road.
In our number 10 spot we have Snow White. I'm sure you will all remember the infamous tale about Snow White and the 7 dwarves. Snow White's stepmother, the evil queen, was jealous of Snow White's beauty, and so she creates a plan to poison Snow with an apple. Well, apparently this tale has been washed down quite a lot, as the original tale is said to be a lot more, well, kinda inappropriate. The evil queen not only wants Snow dead in the original, but she also wants her liver and lung to be served for dinner. So the evil queen is a cannibal. Well, I can see why they wanted to change the story up a bit. In the origin story, the queen is forced to dance to her death wearing hot iron shoes. Yeah, that definitely is a reflection of the time this story was written in. Also, apparently Snow White isn't awoken by true love's kiss, but actually by the bumpy ride on the horse's back as the prince is carrying Snow back to the castle. Perhaps the executive decision to change the story really was such a good call. If you like this video, don't forget to smash that like button, as it will really help us out. In our number 9 spot we have Rapunzel. Okay, obviously Rapunzel was going to make it on this list because, well, the whole premise of her story is her being stolen from her family and locked in a tower. Already a very terrifying story when you think about it. But actually, the Brothers Grimm version is way more terrifying. Rapunzel gets taken and held in a tower, and one day invites a prince into it and she gets pregnant. After she begins to complain that her clothes are too tight around her belly, the witch who stole her chops off her hair and sends her away, disposes of her. The prince, returning to see Rapunzel, gets thrown off the tower and is blinded by thorny bushes. He eventually finds his family after wandering around for a while. Yikes. Well, certainly having the princess be pregnant and sent away for being pregnant is quite horrific and scandalous, so it makes sense as to why that small detail was erased. In our number 8 spot we have The Little Mermaid. The original story of The Little Mermaid is terrifying. The Little Mermaid took her own life. After doing research for this, I now know that this version is the original. She took her own life because she was heartbroken because the prince married someone else. So sad. She jumps through hoops for him and even thinks about killing him before she jumps into the ocean and takes her own life. Honestly, I can see why some moms are cautious about this tale. In our number 7 spot we have Pinocchio. Apparently in the origin story, Pinocchio kills Jiminy. What? And he sells the book that Geppetto gets by selling his last coat. While researching, I also learned that the structure of the story kind of follows the stories of peasants at the time and how they would venture out into the world but were naively unprepared for what they would find, and this was due to the industrialization of Italy. Interesting stuff. Side note, whenever I hear the name Pinocchio, I can't help but to say it like Geppetto does. Pinocchio! In our number 6 spot we have The Princess and the Frog. There are a few versions of The Princess and the Frog, and they may surprise you to hear. Although after hearing The Little Mermaid's dark past, possibly not. This Disney movie is not very much like its original counterpart, The Frog Prince. In The Frog Prince, we still have the lovely princess that kisses the frog, but she is deeply disgusted by the frog for tricking her into making a deal, and apparently she throws the Frog Prince against the wall and breaks his spell. There is also another version where she cuts the frog's head off, and then another version where the frog tries to sleep on her pillow, which makes no sense to me. I suppose I would have to see it, but it sure sounds creepy. The one where she chops her head off though, damn, that is intense. I'm glad they took that out of the Disney version because I feel like that would have definitely changed the vibe of the film. In our number 5 spot we have Frozen. Okay guys, I'm going to tell you about the origins of Frozen, but then I want you to let it go. The Snow Queen in the origin story is actually evil and takes a young boy and keeps him with her power and will only free him if he solves a puzzle and spells the word eternity. I don't understand. Then a girl with a heart filled with love comes and saves the boy with her power of true love. So not quite the story about sisterly love, but it is about romantic love, so possibly not too far from the point of Disney's Frozen, that love is so much more powerful than fear. In our number 4 spot, we have Sleeping Beauty. Another dark fairy tale for you. This is sort of the origin of Sleeping Beauty. Never one of my favorites, to be honest. The dress was, for sure. I love anything pink. Anyways, apparently in the origin story, the prince's mother was part ogre. Yeah, that shocked me too. But not only that, she wanted to eat Sleeping Beauty for dinner because she was an ogre. Apparently also in the origin, Sleeping Beauty wakes up from her long sleep because one of her twins is eating her finger or sucking on her finger because she apparently conceived and gave birth to twins while sleeping. It's all deeply disturbing and I wish I could unlearn this one. In our number 3 spot, we have Beauty and the Beast. The classic tale of Beauty and the Beast is one that touched the hearts of many when Disney put out their version. But like every other fairy tale on this list, there were many parts that were altered for the PG Disney versions. For example, in the origin, the Beast was actually put under a spell by a dark fairy who fails to seduce him. Honestly, that makes sense. A woman scorned is a scary thing. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned is a popular phrase for a reason. Apparently the Beast takes pure Belle and forces her to have her hands chopped off by threatening to take her father. Apparently there is also another version where she chops her own hands off so that she is not as attractive to her brother or father. Yeah, I'm super uncomfortable. In our number 2 spot, we have Cinderella. The origins of my favorite fairy tale, Cinderella, are kind of all over the place. There are so many versions of Cindy, as this is one of the most used plot lines in movies, TV, and books. But some of the oldest versions definitely have a few dark twists and turns. In the Brothers Grimm, doves are sent to Cindy from heaven and the doves peck their eyes out. I don't understand. Just why? Apparently the evil stepsisters cut off their toes to fit in the shoes. Now that's commitment. And in one version, Cinderella kills her stepmother. Apparently there is a version where Cinderella escapes her incestuous father, and that is just too much for me. Thank God for Disney's version. My childhood wouldn't have been the same without Gus Gus the Mouse. I just love that name. In our number 1 spot, we have Goldilocks and the 3 Bears. This is a story that I'm sure you have heard plenty of times in your life, if you were born in North America at least. There once was a golden-haired girl that stumbled upon a cottage with 3 beds, 3 porches, and basically 3 everything. Plot spoiler, it's the home of 3 bears who discover her sleeping in the bed. And she befriends them and stays for dinner. Well, in the Robert Southey's version, Goldilocks is actually an old woman, and when the bears discover her, she jumps out of the window and falls to her death. Apparently there is another version where the bears eat her, naturally.
Coming into number 10, we have Pinocchio. All Pinocchio wants to do is be a real boy, but that is not happening in Carlo Collodi's original version of the tale. In the 1800s version of the tale, Pinocchio kills Jiminy Cricket by throwing a hammer at him. Why? Well, he's angry at the cricket for being a bit of a know-it-all, so he batters him. He doesn't even really feel that bad about it, to be honest. He then falls asleep by the fire and his feet burn off, but it's alright because good old Geppetto builds him some new ones. Then, naughty Pinocchio is hung from a tree and suffocates. The moral of the story? Disobey and die. One way to scare the kids into good behavior, I guess. Coming into number 9, we have Sleeping Beauty. So the original tale of Sleeping Beauty is a story called The Sun, Moon and Talia, and is like Sleeping Beauty about a princess that falls into a deep sleep. Okay, at first, the similarities are on point. Instead of being prophesied to prick her finger on a spindle and spinning wheel, it's flax and hemp that are a problem. The girl does get flax stuck under her fingernail and falls into a deep sleep. Her rich father has her enshrined in a mausoleum in the woods, where one day an older king from another kingdom finds her. He then rapes her corpse and leaves her. She then gives birth and fairies look after her babies until one day one of her kids sucks the flax out from under her fingernail and she wakes up to 2 surprises. She names her kids Sun and Moon, as they, like the celestial bodies, are a mystery to her. The rapey and older king returns to find her awake and they fall in love, which is really weird. The only problem is, other than the rape, is that he has a wife. His wife then finds out and orders her chef to cook her husband's kids and kill the mistress, but he manages to find out first and kill her. The king, Talia, Sun and Moon live happily ever after. Isn't that nice? Coming into number 8 we have Cinderella. Cinderella is a heartwarming rags to riches tale, and yeah, the version we know today is sad, what with Cinderella being an orphan and everything, but beyond that, Cinders does get a benevolent fairy godmother who helps her deal with her sisters and wicked stepmother. It all works out alright in the end though. That slipper fits and she marries her prince. Okay, sure, but in the origin version, her ghastly sisters chop parts of their own feet off to be able to fit in the slipper. The prince only finds out when he finds blood in the shoe. Eventually he does find out that Cinderella is the true owner of the slippers and they get married, but that isn't all. Doves peck out her older sister's eyes. Hip hip hooray. Coming in at number 7 we have Snow White. So we all love a bit of Snow White, right? In the story we know and love, Snow White is a princess with a wicked stepmother who forces her out of her home because she's jealous of her beauty. She meets 7 kindly dwarves in the woods who take care of her, but when the wicked stepmother finds out she's still alive, she tries to poison her. Later, she's awoken by a prince with a true love's kiss. Things weren't so cutesy in the original Brothers Grimm tale. Snow White is indeed cast out, but the wicked stepmother, Queen of the Kingdom, asks a huntsman to murder her in the woods and bring back her heart and lungs so she can eat them. The huntsman does spare her, but the queen finds out and eventually tries to kill her 3 times. Eventually, she gatecrashes Snow White and the prince's wedding and is then forced to put on a pair of burning hot iron shoes that have been in a fire all day, and then she's forced to dance in them until she dies. Her flesh is immediately badly burned, but she eventually drops dead of exhaustion. Honestly, that sounds more like the origin story behind the Red Wedding than a beloved fairy tale. Coming into number 6 we have the Goose Girl. I hadn't heard of the Goose Girl, but I hear it's a very popular tale in Germany and Eastern Europe after doing a bit of research. It's a bedtime fairy tale and its origins are the stuff of nightmares. To cut a long story short, in the original tale, a deceitful maid is thrown into a barrel with spikes and rolled around till she dies. Some classic medieval torture. It does sound particularly grim. Is it worse than being hung, drawn and quartered, or better? What about being pulled apart by horses? Coming into number 5 we have Hansel and Gretel. There are kind of 2 twisted origin stories here that merge to create one tale, told verbally for hundreds of years, but first written down by the Brothers Grimm. So back in medieval Germany, where the tale is set, there were widespread famines and people simply could no longer provide for their children, so they abandoned them, leaving them to die alone in the woods, possibly from starvation, or maybe by being savaged by animals. This legit happened in history. The next part of the tale comes from the story of a pair of rival bakers. One of them had the misfortune of being a woman. Katharina Schraderin was well known for her incredible gingerbread in her German village in the 1600s. A competing male baker became jealous of her success, so played on a timeless trend of smearing the women with nasty rumours. What could he do in the 1600s? Well, he called her a witch. In accusing her, he convinced others to track her down. The posse then rounded her up and burned her to death in her very own baker's oven. Right. Coming into number 4 we have Mulan. The original Mulan was written by Chi Reno and was called The Ballad of Hua Mulan. Any ballad can't be a good thing. Hua Mulan was a legendary Chinese woman. In the ballad, like in the fairy tale, she disguises herself as a man in order to join the army, and she falls in love with Luo Cheng. When she comes back from war, she discovers that her father has died and her mum has remarried. Not only that, the man who waged the war in the first place has called for her to be his concubine, so basically his sex slave. Instead of doing that, she commits suicide, but before she does, she gets her sister to dress as a man and send a letter to Liu Chang. Her sister does, but then ends up sleeping with him herself. Horrifying. Coming into number 3 we have Red Riding Hood. The story of Red Riding Hood that we know and love today includes a grandma, a wolf and a little girl and a hunter. Despite a few darker undertones, the story has a happy ending and Red Riding Hood is reunited with her grandma and the big bad wolf is killed. Not so much in the original, however. In the earliest versions, which were said to originate in Italy and were said to be named things like the story of grandmother or false grandmother, actually things are pretty gnarly. In these early versions, while it was usually a wolf that did the taunting, some actually had vampires or ogres after the little girl. In the origin tales, the wolf does kill the grandmother and then gets Red Riding Hood to unwittingly eat her body and drink her blood. He then strips the girl naked, forces her to burn her clothes, and then makes her get into bed with him. In most of the old stories he eats her, but in some, well, it's worse. Coming into number 2, we have the Pied Piper of Hamlin. So we know the story of the Pied Piper. It's a popular but admittedly dark fairy tale in which a town in Lower Saxony, Germany is infested with rats, as it probably would have been in the Middle Ages. Enter the Pied Piper, a man with a magical pipe who does a deal with the town mayor to lure all of the rats away. He does this successfully and the town is rid of the rodents. However, the mayor refuses to pay, so the Pied Piper uses his magic pipe to lead away all of the town's children in revenge. Well, it turns out the dark origin here is that it's actually true. Surviving town records from the church in Hamlin say that in the year of 1284, on the day of St. John and Paul on June 26, by a piper clothed in many kinds of colours, 130 children born in Hamlin were seduced and lost at a place of execution near the coffin. It is thought that the children were taken as part of the Children's Crusade, and the whole business with the rats was added later. Some even say that the real piper was a paedophile who abducted the children in their sleep. Finally, honestly, I don't think it gets darker or scarier than this. We have Ariel the Little Mermaid. Hands down, the origin story to the Little Mermaid is absolutely horrifying. Hans Christian Andersen's original tale was gruesome. I hope you're ready for it. Instead of a princess mermaid falling in love, exchanging her voice for legs, and marrying a prince to live happily ever after, the origin was fraught with bad decision making and utter heartbreak. The mermaid is indeed a princess and does indeed save the life of a prince she falls for. She also makes a bargain with a sea witch in exchange for legs so she can meet him, only the original version is much more intense. The sea witch takes the mermaid's tongue and gives her legs. Every time she walks though, she feels the pain of walking on knives and sticking her legs through swords. Unfortunately, this has the effect of making her feet bleed regularly. She's told if she doesn't secure the love of a prince, she will die. She meets the prince, who asks her to dance for him, which she does even though it causes her pure and utter agony. He then falls in love with someone else, breaking her heart. Her mermaid sisters have her back. They sell their lovely hair to the sea witch for a knife that offers the mermaid a way out. If she kills the prince and drips his blood on her legs, she can end her pain and become a mermaid again. Sadly for her, she loves him way too much, and instead, as the witch promised, she dies. She simply ceases to exist. Right, not so great then.